A search reveals that this guy is Richard Stieg, who works for Massive Dynamic, Bell's company. When questioned, the person she speaks with says that yes, Stieg worked in their weapons division past tense. He got shit canned for trying to leave with classified info. And the Justice Department was informed since he worked in weapons and they get a little nervous about that kind of thing. Since this is a self-eradicating airborne toxin, it sounds definitely like a weapon. It doesn't sound like a new way of leaving your house smelling springtime fresh.
Spread so severely, I had to have my arm amputated that week.
Whoa, I've seen Terminator 2. I know how this ends. When she's done explaining what happened, the fembot asks if Stieg is part of the pattern, in quotes.
But suffice to say that we've reached a point where science and technology have advanced at such an exponential rate for so long, it may be way beyond our ability to regulate and control them.
Nonsense. If there's one thing bumbling, technophobic, attention-craving, gasbag old farts knows, it's how to manage cutting-edge technology. Still, they have the means to track this guy down, and inside, they discover a hidden lab in the floor. While they deal with that, piano music arrives for the heart-to-heart conversation between Bishop and Peter, first about Peter's health again, and then a plea not to have to go back to the hospital when this is done. I mean, it's got to be a lot more fun to pump people full of drugs and have your own cow. Well, this is all interrupted by Stieg. Seems that the FBI that has this place swarming with agents and even at least one sniper isn't watching all of the exits because it's Peter that notices the terrorist wanted for killing dozens of people and attacking a federal agent with a bomb is strolling out of the building that they're watching. Of course, maybe that's completely accurate. It's not like we have ever witnessed the hunt for a terrorist in Boston before. Well, one thing I've learned is that villains are really into cardio, because he is pursued by Peter, and then by Dunham, and still he has enough in him to do a flying leap off the roof of a building onto a fire escape without twisting or breaking anything. Little do people realize that a vital part of chemical weapons research is parkour. Despite having both of them after him, it's basically one behind and one heading him off that finally manages to catch Stieg. So he's brought back in for questioning.
You want immunity. I want a detailed account of all the synthetic chemicals you had in that storage facility.
Yeah, I don't see immunity happening. You don't turn an entire plane worth of people into jello and get to walk away. Although I'm also betting you don't blow up a federal agent without accidentally tripping and falling out of a window either. Stieg doesn't believe it either, so Peter heads in to make him talk. He starts by noting that it would be easy for him to extract a sample of the compound from Scott and introduce it into Stieg, which would make him come down with all of that because science. Well, there's no time for him to let that threat stew, though. So he's going to instead smash the guy's fingers until he talks. Finally, knowing all that is needed in order to counter this thing, they discover they can dissolve it all in Scott's own blood. He's got a backup blood supply in order to do a full-body transfusion, like what they do with the Queen every week. So while that's being done, Broyles runs into Dunham, where she thanks him for his support in this incredibly crazy, insane Looney Tunes plan of theirs. But he wants to talk to her because pulling that off has been impressive to him and to those that he works with, who are concerned about the pattern. I mean, we can guess that's what it is, because he starts listing other things that make turning a plane full of people into stew look mundane. Like an airplane that caused a tsunami once. He wants to recruit her to help investigate this, but she turns it down. Just one case has nearly jellified her boyfriend. Taking on more will probably get them turned into cats or something. Well, Scott is making a recovery, proving once again, if the problem calls for mad science, get a scientist out of an asylum. As for Stieg...
Don't worry, our immunity agreement holds.
Well, thankfully, this deal isn't just for helping save Scott, because we let the mass murderer go because he helped save my boyfriend is not going to play well in the press.
I recorded the conversation.
Where's the recording?
I buried it.
What do you think you are, a pirate? So she goes to find it and discovers that the person he has worked with is none other than Scott. And he's just a few rooms down from Stieg, now that they put him back in the hospital again. And Dunham dropped off his clothes earlier for when he goes home next week. So what he does is he suits up, heads in, smothers Stieg, and then takes off, just as Dunham is coming back. Well, we all know what is coming. The problem that every serious relationship has to deal with sooner or later, a car chase. You can't keep running away from your problems, Scott. I'm the one with the talking stick now, Scott. Well, that's great. A whole hell of a lot of trouble we went to save this dick just so we can kill him. It's enough to make you want to just get rid of your rusty isolation chamber and cow, isn't it? As he dies in her arms, rather than saying he's sorry for betraying her, he says to ask herself why Broyles sent her to that storage facility in the first place. So after she's had a moment, on the way back, Agent Francis laments how the world has changed to make them obsolete. The scope of their work has increased, while their ability to investigate it has decreased. This seems to inspire her to change her mind about doing Broyles' work, going to see Peter and explaining why they need to keep doing this kind of thing. That this isn't some fake threat on her part this time. The threats are real now. Peter agrees. Sees that as a reason to leave, though, and then, despite all of that, decides to stay anyway. We're going to go forward with the mad science. Oh, and speaking of which...
How long's he been dead?
5 hours.
Question him.
Yay, who wants to crawl into the head of the dead guy? As a launch to a series, this two-part story is effective in both establishing what is to be expected and to also imply that there is more that will be revealed over time. I'll be honest in admitting that the two things that make me gun-shy about continuing the series personally are my experience with X-Files, which this feels similar to, and Lost, which Abrams helped mastermind and was notorious for issues related to teasing versus payoff. Admittedly, the network didn't help matters. Despite that, the pilot succeeds in doing what it needs to do. So taken in a vacuum, because as I said, I haven't watched it, so I can't say whether or not this is one of many shows that promises a lot, but gives little once the series gets going, it nevertheless works. It requires a heavy dose of suspension of disbelief, as just about everything technical in this episode, from large to small, is complete and utter nonsense, and in some cases doesn't even have any kind of rules whatsoever, it seems. The pilot at least says that Fringe is science fantasy in a contemporary setting. The performers do a fine job, with John Noble, of course, dominating thanks to the character that he's been given, although he's shown to be skilled in fastidiously insane people. Obviously, Denethor of Lord of the Rings leaps to mind in his special way of eating tomatoes. And personally, I'm also reminded of his role on The Blacklist as the OCD maker of perfect alibis. But Joshua Jackson holds his own in the scenes with him, his Peter both comprehending what his father is saying, but also being quick to question it, forming a perfect double act between the two. Anna Torv as Dunham gets the most screen time and can certainly work with what she's given, but the writers struggle with what to give her. Obsessed detective because of a personal connection, yes, but I particularly think of the part with Scott dying in her arms and the scene not showing that, after all she's done and learned over this story, how this is impacting her. Yes, again, we have the scene in the ambulance after, but nothing during that moment that implies the enormity of just what she's losing and all of that, both the fact that he's dying and the fact that he's betrayed her like this. Reflecting on it, I believe she's meant to be an audience identification character, one of those protagonists whose job it is to be normal within the extraordinary, and that sometimes leads to not standing out. Everything about her personality and history only exists to serve the plot. The romance with Scott, for instance. It drives her actions. Her past connection with Broyle because of his friend. It's a complication to the investigation and an obstacle to be overcome. But other than that, she's essentially a blank slate. This is the same thing I said in the final countdown, but I guess it bears repeating, that having aspects separate from your job and plot help the character to seem more alive, as seen when Nicolas Cage in The Rock asked for a small scene to establish that he's a Beatlemaniac who prefers LPs. It's not much, but it helps to flesh out the character by giving them something a little bit more, something beyond what you expect them to be, something that says they're alive in addition to whatever the events are happening. The Bishops get those kinds of details, so even though they have less screen time, they feel more alive to the audience. This is a deficiency of writing, I have to emphasize, not in performing. She clearly does the best with what she's given, but it's a deficiency that hopefully the series would correct quickly, lest our central character be overshadowed by larger personalities and fantastical events.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
This technique to extract information from a corpse once. You can do that if they haven't been dead for longer than 6 hours.
Right, because after 6 hours, that's when they're really dead.